If you follow me on any platform other than YouTube, it's safe to say you probably know about my hyperfixation on Lookism. I mean, it's totally not like I posted 7 edits of Samuel Sios consecutively because I learned how to make edits. If you couldn't tell by me going insane over him on Twitter periodically, he played a huge part in my return to the world of Lookism. But while I'm also a big gay idiot, the characters aren't what got me into the story. The story is what got me into the story. Shocker, I know. The plot is very well executed, and while sometimes it's a bit hard to believe that some of these people are at the age where they could go to school with someone like me if they lived in Florida, it got me completely hooked to the point where just the material on Webtoon wasn't enough to quench my insatiable thirst for content. I went and looked for more of the chapters online that weren't available on Webtoon because I just really wanted to know what was gonna happen. Though I still can't find somewhere with chapters 398 through whichever chapter is the most recent, which I'm pretty sure is 400. If you know one with an English translation, let me know. A Chinese translation would do as well. I can't read Chinese as well as I do English, but I'm usually able to understand it well enough. All that is besides the point. My point is, the story is great, the characters are great, and I am very gay and love the story, which is why it pains me to have to make a video like this. Well, I say have to, but in reality I'm just making this because I was banned from playing Genshin, and I also wanted to upload at least one thing this summer so people know I'm not dead. And I'm also putting off my summer classes. Also, this idea just randomly popped in my head while I was in the shower, and I said, why not? By the way, if at any point I sound like I'm rushing or I don't want to be here, it's because I've been putting off doing this like pretty much the entire morning. I haven't really felt like talking. Not only that, but I have a massive stomach ache because I just finished, what's it called? I just finished a giant like king-size thing of Kit Kat Duos, which is mocha and chocolate flavored if you're curious. I don't know why you would be, and I don't want to eat the one Slim Jim that I have because I don't have any more food. Holy shit, this script is 10 pages. I didn't notice that. As much as I'd love to see some representation for POC who aren't Koreans, queer people, and strong women, for the most part, this really isn't the way to do it. By the way, if you couldn't tell already, this video is gonna have major Lookism spoilers, discuss some darker topics like racism and sewer slide, and other stuff like that. If you don't want to hear anything along those lines, I suggest you click off and I'll catch you next time. Probably in a Reddit video or something. Those are easy to make and I like making them. Anyway, pretty much the only named queer rep is a gay guy who is written to not only be a complete pervert, but also convicted for being a rapist. A large portion of the material he's featured in is pretty much all just to make him seem like as much of a creep as possible. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against the idea of a gay person being the villain, but this is the only openly gay person in the series, for now at least, and you're gonna portray him like this. I am heavily for the idea that Jay also might be queer-coded though. I hope that doesn't get vetoed and he turns out to get another generic female love interest or something. I know Daniel is definitely being set up as getting with Crystal in the future, but let me hang on to this little bit of hope, okay? If you thought the queer rep was bad, the rep for POC other than Asians might be even worse. A little bit of background on me, if you somehow don't know by now, I'm 100% Chinese. Both my parents and their parents lived in China before my parents made the decision to move to America, and I currently label myself as aro ace and gay, although I've been having an on and off sexuality crisis for a while now, and it will probably continue being a thing. There's barely any POC in the story at all, other than Asians obviously, which I'm gonna stop saying because the comic is literally set in Korea, like, what do you expect? And the ones who are there represent extreme stereotypes of their race, like, most of the time. The foreigner from Thailand has a very heavy accent. Everyone seems to think he's an illegal immigrant, he's in debt, and he stole some guy's money to go pay off his debt. While we later learn that he's a Muay Thai genius or something, my initial reaction to this wasn't great. I do like the part where they show one of the characters having a white savior complex though, minus the white part. It does a good job of showing someone who thinks they're doing good, but instead they're simultaneously insulting the person they're quote-unquote protecting, in this case by saying he's an illegal immigrant and saying they'll help him hide from the police, and usually end up doing more harm than good. But I have nothing good to say about the black representation in Lookism. There are probably less than 4 black people who are prominently shown in Lookism and not background characters. Hell, I'd say even including the black characters that are background characters, there would still be like less than 5. And at least 2 or 3 of them were in an fighting ring for criminals in which their leader was literally called Marcus the Asian Slayer, before it later got removed from the translation. I'm not sure why, pretty sure it's just because people saw an issue with this, so they were like, if we just remove the Asian part, it'll be fine. But it's not. And the one black guy that wasn't a part of the group looks like a walking stereotype of black people. It's not just me saying this, by the way. These are all things I've heard actual black people critique about the comic. And can we just take a moment to talk about how Ollie Wang, a Chinese man, was wearing dreadlocks for pretty much every scene he was in besides his younger backstory days, when he's not even black. At first I thought I was the only person who was a bit put off by this, so I was like, okay, maybe I'm just overreacting. But no, I saw someone else in the comments also talk about it, and I was like, okay, thank God I'm not the only person who thought this was a little bit weird. Lookism was not made to be an inclusive feminist topical comic. That much is very obvious. I love the women of Lookism. I love Sally's spunk even when in the face of danger. I love how much Zoe has developed as a character through the duration of the story. I love how Mary is actually written to be stronger than Vinjin, in judo at least. And I love how, even when she gets annoyed at him a lot, you can tell that Mira genuinely cares about Zack. But you can still see the misogyny seep through sometimes. In all fairness, I don't really think it was intentional, but rather just the result of, really bad traditional Asian belief systems, which I'll talk more about later. But you definitely can still tell that Lookism was written by a man. The emphasis on things like their chest and their ass, which is pretty apparent in that one panel where Noman, I forgot his actual name, picks up Mitsuki, and that one panel of Mary walking up the stairs, which again, whether intentional or not, is a bit weird. I might just be overreacting on this, but as an AFAB person, I don't really think so. When I first read it, I loved that PTJ added that some of the girls, like Crystal and Mary, can fight pretty well. But while it is a trait that's mentioned a few times, it's rarely, if ever, shown. I would love to see the girls in action, but it only happens once in a blue moon. There was that one time where Crystal beat off a bunch of female bullies in Naughty World. I don't know how to pronounce it. And punched a guy so hard I think he went flying. And that one panel that showed Mary cleaning her hands off with a bunch of bodies on the ground, and a few panels where Mary shows off her skill as the Empress of 2 seconds by flipping people over in 2 seconds, but that's about it. PTJ gives these girls this super interesting trait by having them able to fight, which I love, but then he rarely ever actually uses it. Actually, no, I'm not entirely right on that. I forgot about Sophia. But while Crystal and Mary get the cool characteristic of still being feminine and being able to fight, though rarely shown, Sophia, who gets introduced in the Workers' third affiliate arc, is portrayed as another stereotype. She's extremely muscular, and it's clear that her appearance was meant to portray the stereotype of muscular and strong women being less feminine. Don't twist my words here, I'm all for breaking gender norms. I'm very femme-presenting while using they/he pronouns and constantly wear suits instead of dresses to formal events. But this clearly wasn't meant to show that. This was meant to be a stereotype of strong women. I love Sophia, she's a good character for the few chapters that we know her, but that doesn't mean I can ignore the blatant stereotyping. Hi, this is being recorded after the fact, so that's probably why I sound different, if you can tell, but I forgot to mention here that the opposite is also true, because Mary and Crystal, right, they're supposed to be like really strong and really capable of fighting, but they aren't. How do I make this sound like not like I'm being mean? They're not built that way, okay? Like, you don't have to be like super muscular to be strong, right? And you don't have to just not be feminine at all to be strong, which is what I've been talking about here before. But they just don't look like they fight. I don't even know if what I'm saying is making any sense, but like I just wanted to say that. If you want to read a comic where the girls can and do fight, I recommend Viral Hit, which is also coincidentally being co-written by PTJ. I'm not super far into it, I'm only on chapter 52 and I stopped reading because I got too much secondhand embarrassment. But from where I am now, it's pretty good. There's an entire few chapters where it's just these two really cool skilled girls fighting, And while you can still sort of see some misogyny slip through, it's a great fight, and it actually puts their character traits to good use. Also, one of the girls completely owns the main character a few chapters before that, and I think it's pretty funny. There's also the girls who are very obviously just made to be one of the main cast love interests. The most obvious and egregious example of this is Lua Im, who is so obviously just made to be Johan's love interest. Is it Johan or Johan? I don't know. When she was first introduced, I thought, oh, interesting. She's number 5 a big deal, so she could probably fight, but nope. We get to see her do like 2 moves when she's introduced, and then immediately get pummeled by one of the guys and saved by Johan. Okay, I'm cutting in again while I'm editing this, but yes, I know she's number 5 because she's really good at all this other stuff, but it was just so disappointing, okay? Okay, I'll get back to editing and maybe doing my summer lessons. Okay, bye. Again, don't get me wrong, I love her, but come on, seriously, it's so obvious. Honestly, I don't entirely blame PTJ for a lot of these issues. Things like racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and xenophobia are rooted in a lot of traditional Asian beliefs. Trust me, I know. I've grown up in a household full of Chinese people who have held on to very traditional Chinese beliefs, and they're pretty much the most discriminatory person I've ever seen, despite also facing racism because we live in America. They would honestly rather make it a competition for the prize of most discriminated against than admit they were wrong in their beliefs. I've only recently seen the true extent of how racist my parents are in these past 2 to 3 years. It's as if they see every single black person as the black people who would harass Asians on the subway in New York, and every single queer person likes to drink piss. Don't even ask. My dad is so anti-Semitic that even after I wrote an entire 7-page essay on Jewish history and debunking his anti-Semitic beliefs, he still spews the same garbage to this day. Got off track a bit there, but my point is that I don't entirely blame PTJ himself for a lot of these things. Most of the blame should lie in the racist, sexist, homophobic, traditional Asian beliefs that for some reason are still around. But he's also still partially to blame, because even after seeing so many people criticize you for it, you still don't make an effort to do some research. I was homophobic and racist once too, I'll be the first to say it, and that was because I was an undereducated kid who just blindly believed everything people told me. But I made the conscious decision to change after realizing that my beliefs were harmful and incorrect. Remus, you've been going on for the past 3.5 pages of the script dunking on this comic. Didn't you say you loved it? I do love this comic. I've been obsessing over it for the past 2 months or so. If I absolutely hated it, how would I do that? The thing is, while you can enjoy a piece of media as much as you want, it's also important to be critical of it. If you just love something unconditionally and turn a blind eye to everything that it does terribly wrong, you're honestly no better than the people who relentlessly shit on it. It's the same with your friends. If your best friend who you had known since diapers starts acting like a complete shithead, you're gonna call him out on it. Though honestly, I'm a huge hypocrite on that one. I have a close friend who I jokingly call my wife. Don't worry, Samuel, I know she's still my husband and I'm not cheating on you. Who has said racist shit to me as a white person, and I just don't have the balls to tell her, hey, that's kind of fucked up, maybe you shouldn't say that. I've spent the past almost 4 pages just talking shit about Lookism, so I think it's time to remedy that by gushing about some of the stuff that I love about it. I love how they have the ability to make me feel bad for most of the antagonists in the story. It's not hard to get me to sympathize with people because of how much I've experienced, but they just do it so well. Hostel's backstory was legitimately so sad that I cried pretty much every time I reread it, and Big Deals is also so heart-wrenching that they've probably become my favorite out of the 4 crews, despite the fact that I read it after I stopped reading Lookism for a while because I got too much secondhand embarrassment. Everything before Workers will still forever be the OG Lookism to me, and it holds such a huge place in my heart. Honestly, I miss when they were just teenagers having teenager problems in school, and maybe outside of it every once in a while. Nowadays, I genuinely completely forget that they're even in school before I realize how old they are. Another thing I like about Lookism is how it recognizes its own absurdity of having 16-year-olds who look like they could be 25, have a 9-to-5, and file their taxes, which can be seen in characters like Oldface, who I'm pretty sure was 19 when he was first introduced in the Big Deal's backstory arc, and probably about 22 to 25 in present-day Lookism, who was meant to be a teenager when he was first introduced despite looking like he's older than my grandpa. Every time I remember that Samuel was 16 in the Big Deal backstory, I get reminded by the fact that these people aren't that much older than me, and yet they have bodies of people in their mid-20s. Hell, I have a rather tall male friend who's 16. No, I have several rather tall male friends, and none of them look like that. I've seen seniors I mistook for freshmen who look younger than these characters. Anyway, my point is that I find it rather amusing that Lookism actually acknowledges how strange it is. What was I talking about again? Alright, sympathetic villains. I like how most, if not all of them, have actually understandable motivations. It honestly does such a great job of showing the human psyche and how differently people can react to trauma. If I had to pick one, despite absolutely dumping on him earlier, I sympathize with Ollie the most. His character does a good job of showing how children who are raised under the pressure of perfection don't actually turn out to be that perfect most of the time. Maybe it's because I'm also a Chinese kid who's raised by parents who will yell at me if I achieve anything under what they consider perfect, and that's why I'm so drawn to him. But the fact that they can make me feel for someone like him, who, up to this point, has been portrayed as a complete ass, really goes to show how well written the backstories are. His death really got me too. I still cry every time. I'd love to go on about how it's a great representation of this and that, but I don't think anything I say could have as much of an impact as the actual scene has. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go read it. It's such a great scene, and honestly, I can't put the things I feel when I read it into words. Trust me, I've been sitting here typing and retyping different descriptions of it, but none of them do it justice. The villain potential that Jiho had as well. I completely understand why he was killed off, and honestly his story arc made me really sad as well, because he represents a version of Daniel that never grew and never learned. But I feel bad for him, even though it was entirely his fault. He kept making the same mistakes over and over and expecting people to clean up his messes for him, till eventually it got really too big for anyone to do anything about. Another thing I love is how they made me hate the people that I'm supposed to hate. Well, for the most part. Samuel is too hot to conform to how my brain normally works. If you know anything about me and my opinions on this story, you probably know that I absolutely despise Eugene and workers. And honestly, I'm glad I do, because that means that PTJ did a good job of characterizing them. They're obviously meant to be the villain of villains, and I'm glad I hate them. It might also definitely have something to do with how manipulative Eugene is. I've dealt with a lot of manipulative people before, and out of all forms of abuse, manipulation is probably the worst in my opinion. You can yell at people, hit people, etc., but they will probably eventually grow used to it and become numb. But manipulation is so psychological that it both intrigues and infuriates me. They can make you think that you're actually the one at fault, that you caused this, and they were the one to save you, and blah blah blah. Eugene is honestly a great example of this. You never actually get to see how good or bad he is at fighting, at least up to the chapters I've read. But you don't really need to. He's terrifying all on his own, despite being either probably my height or shorter than me. I'm 5'5" for reference. I don't actually know how tall he is, but I can't imagine he's over 5'6", so at most he's like 1 inch taller than me. That stupid smirk of his infuriates me, and he has such a punchable face, and honestly, I love it. It really goes to show how good PTJ is at characterization, because he's obviously meant to be the villain. Honestly, I'm kind of interested to see what his backstory is. Hopefully I don't end up sympathizing with him too, but who am I kidding? I probably will. Also, I think it's interesting to point out that he has the same school uniform as one of the characters from Viral Hit, Bami Choi. Canonically, the two stories are set in the same universe and at roughly the same time frame, so I think it would be kind of interesting if we could see either Bami show up in Lookism or Eugene show up in Viral Hit. I also really like how they don't drag out the story unnecessarily. Well, it's been running for like 400 episodes now, so you could say that they are dragging it out, but it's at least realistic. Since the series started, it's always been intended to be about the 4 crews, so it makes sense to be 400 chapters because they're still dealing with the crews. They haven't just randomly inserted stuff that they call conflicts into the plot and forced it to run for another 20 million episodes because profit, like a bunch of other webtoons. It's actually quite understandable why it's been running for 400 episodes and more to come. Another thing I really love is some of the relationships between characters and how you can imagine that some of them actually interact outside of being friends on camera. Like, you know how in some of the stories, like, you rarely ever, you just see these two people just talk about whatever conflict is going on right now, and you can see that a friendship was meant to be inserted there, right? But it just doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like how friends would actually talk. You just get the sense that, oh, these two are supposed to be friends, like canonically in the story, but you can't really see that they could actually plausibly be friends if these two were in real life. Which is why I love how some of the relationships in Lookism were established. I love the relationship between Zach and Johan. It's really sweet how even after Johan abandoned him, beat him up, and really refuses to listen at all, Zach is still only really worried about Johan and his health. The scene I'm referencing here is the one where they meet at the food stand and have a small fight, and after Zach gets beaten and he's lying on the floor, you can tell how visibly distressed and worried he is about Johan, because in the middle of the fight, Johan's eyes had a brief lapse and he missed a punch. Something similar to this happens in the Workers' Third Affiliate arc too, towards the end. And there's also that one time where it happens during the summit meeting, I'm pretty sure, but I didn't mention that in the script for some reason. I guess I forgot. And despite Zach literally having been bloodied and beaten by him both times, he's still just worried about him. Just really tugs on my heartstrings, you know? Another one I really like is Gun and Goose. It's basically just two ridiculously strong men are rivals, but I find their bickering and fighting at the most inappropriate of times kind of entertaining. And it's also how they legitimately act like two friends sometimes, despite only seeing each other as rivals. Jay and Daniel are honestly the sweetest thing ever, followed shortly by Jason Vasco. Jay literally decided he would pursue a path in the medical department just because Daniel was at the hospital in a coma that one time. And that one scene where Jay was just putting band-aids on things that don't even need band-aids was just really endearing. I don't think I really need to explain why Vasco and Jace are so great. Vinjin and Mary have their moments too, and I like how they're not written to be a couple, despite literally every duo stereotype saying that they should be. They give off the sort of partners in crime vibe, and I'm all for it. And how could I forget? I love the interactions between Jake and Samuel. I wish we could have gotten to see an alternative route where Samuel wasn't a self-absorbed piece of shit and stayed friends with Jake. While the two of them as a duo would be so cool, honestly, I find their current interactions as frenemies kind of interesting and entertaining too. I think it's funny how they start fighting each other like nearly every time they cross paths, but you can tell neither of them have any extremely ill intent in the fight. It's just sort of become a tradition and just a thing that they do. Also, I really love the scene where Jake texts Samuel that he's the only former member of Big Deal that hasn't come back yet and that they still have his coat. And when Samuel refuses and just sends back a middle finger, I love that scene. It really shows that Jake still wants to welcome him back into Big Deal even after all the shit that he's done. And honestly, I'm here for it. I've talked a lot about the stuff that I like in the comic, but I just realized that I never really explained how I got into it. Ideally, this would go in the beginning, but I think my intro is pretty decently paced as it is, so I'm just gonna explain it here. I was reading Webtoon one night, and I found a comic called Tales of Greed, which I'm pretty sure is also by PTJ. It's a horror comic, and told in the sort of adventure of the day type style, and the title is rather self-explanatory. Character finds something useful, overuses it to lie to everyone or something, and they either die or have something horrible happen to them. The comic is pretty good and rather interesting, though most of it has been put behind a paywall now, and I don't know how PTJ finds so much time to co-write so many different webtoons, but that's not the point. I usually read some of the comments. I know, ew. So I did just that, and most of them were talking about a comic called Lookism, so I decided to check it out because Tales of Greed didn't have any more updates at the time. And that's how I met your father. No, I'm kidding. Mostly. Anyway, It had an interesting concept and immediately hooked me. I'm a huge fan of anything mythical or fantasy related, so the concept of having two bodies sounded kind of interesting. I didn't know it was about fighting at the time, and honestly, if they had advertised that instead of Daniel having two bodies, I might not have gotten into it because I just wasn't all that into action comics. I'm still not, but I make exceptions. So I spent what I think was about 2 days straight just binging it, and it's a really good story. I had to stop in the beginning of the Workers arc because I got too much secondhand embarrassment when Daniel cosplayed as some sort of mix between Tanjiro and Nezuko in broad daylight in front of a huge ass company. But I went back to finish it recently and it has me completely hooked. I miss the old days of Lookism so much, but man are the new arcs interesting. I think this is probably a good place to leave off. I've probably left out like 10 million things I originally intended to say in this script because I have a terrible memory. But you know what I say to that? Skill issue. Anyway, if you haven't already read Lookism, what the fuck are you doing here? You just listen to me rant about the positives and the negatives of a webcomic you haven't even seen. And for what? But seriously, if you haven't read it yet, please do. It's a great read, and in no amount of explaining can I ever do it justice. Also, I desperately need to talk to people who know about Lookism. I managed to get 2 of my close friends to read it, but they haven't gotten into the more recent stuff yet, and it's killing me inside. If you've already read Lookism, I recommend, again, Viral Hit. It has a much more realistic approach to learning how to fight, hence why the name used to be just How to Fight. The main character, Haben, in the beginning is essentially Viral Hit's Jiho, but like way better. He's a far more realistic version of someone who wants to learn to fight, by which I mean he doesn't master everything immediately like Daniel does. It requires practice, repetition, and you don't get insane strength right away. This is coming from a violinist who hasn't touched their violin since summer break started, by the way. I should really practice more, especially considering I'm going to the top orchestra next year. Fun. Also, I need to get more people into Viral Hit too. The community for it is even smaller than Lookism's. Okay, I'll stop boring you with my ramblings. If you want to see me more than every once in a blue moon, follow me on literally any of my socials. I'm most active on Twitter, but that really isn't saying much since I've stopped using that as much as I used to as well. Oh, enjoy my Discord server. It's on the cusp of dying and I don't want that. Also, I need people to talk to about Lookism. And also my commissions are open, so check literally any of my social medias for more information if you're interested in commissioning me. Leave some video suggestions in the comments if you want, and leave Eugene is a stinky little turd while you're there. I want to see who actually watches my videos, because you need help. Okay, bye. The foreigner from Thailand has a huge... What the fuck? Where was I going with that? Oh, I keep moving this mic, like, unconsciously because I'm nervous. I don't know how good the sound quality is, but hopefully I won't have to redo this. I'm not super far into it. I'm only on chapter 52, and I stopped reading because I got too much secondhand embarrassment. Okay, Aaliyah's texting you about official. So, man. Oh my god. I need to say this. I can't say interactions. But you can tell neither of them actually have any, like, issues. Extremely ill intent in the fight. Fuck. Sorry, me and Aaliyah just started having a conversation about rhythm games in the middle of this. But seriously, if you haven't read it, What did I intend to say here if you haven't read it yet? And also, my commissions are open, so check literally any of my social medias for more information if you're interested in commissioning me. Commissioning me? What the fuck does that mean?